Hey guys, welcome to Tech Ginger. My name is Nunya, and today we're going to be looking at the queue data structure. So in a previous video, I talked about the stack data structure, and today we are going to be looking at the queue. So if you want to watch the video on the stack data structure, I'm going to leave the link of that video in the description. So without wasting your time, let's get into the code and let's look at how a queue works and an implementation of that in JavaScript. All right, so a queue is a linear data structure that follows the first in, first out principle, or the FIFO principle. This means that the first element added to the queue will be the first one to be removed. So you can think of this like a queue of people waiting in a line. The first person to arrive will be the first person to leave the line. So we have various methods that we are going to be working with. We have the enqueue, the queue, pick is empty, size, and print. So you use these methods to work on a queue. So enqueue enables you to add an element to the end of the queue. The queue removes and returns the first element from the queue. Pick is used to view the first element in the queue without removing it. It's empty, tells you if the queue is empty. Size just gives you the size of the queue, and prints out the elements in the queue. So we have the class queue over here. We are going to be implementing these methods to work on the queue. So the first thing we do is to create a constructor, and this constructor is going to hold an items array, which is going to be initialized on empty array. So we are going to be working basically on this array. So we are going to be using the various array methods that exist to manipulate this to turn it to a queue. All right, so the first method is the enqueue. So I'm going to write that. I'm going to say enqueue, and then we want to pass in the elements that we want to add to the queue. So we want to say element and say this dot element dot push, and then pass in the element. So that is the enqueue method for you. Okay, so the next method is the dequeue method, which allows you to remove and return the first element from the queue. So the first thing you do is to basically check if the queue is empty. So you're going to say if this dot is empty, you want to return. So if the queue is empty, you want to say sorry, the queue is empty, right? So if it isn't empty, then you want to return this dot items dot shift, right? So shift is a method that exists on an array that allows you to remove the first element from the array, and it returns it. So it allows you to remove the first index of the array. So we are going to be using that to remove elements from our queue. All right, so the next method is the view the first element in the queue without removing it, which is pick, right? So we are basically going to also repeat the same process. We are going to say if the queue is empty, and don't worry, I'm going to be implementing the is empty method later on. So I'm going to say if the queue is empty, then we want to return queue is empty. Let me save that to format it. Else you want to return the first element in the array. So I'm going to say this dot items 0. So I'm returning the first element in the queue. Okay, so now we have gotten to the point where we have to implement our is empty method, right? So we have been using the is empty method to check if the queue is empty. So now let's go on to implement it. So what we do is to basically check the length of the array or the length of the queue and equates that to 0. So you're going to say this dot items dot length equals to 0. So this is going to return a boolean. So you are basically going to be checking this if the length of the queue is equal to 0. So if it is true, this returns a boolean. So if it is true, that means our queue is empty. If it is false, that means there are some items in the queue. Okay, so let's move on to the next method, which is getting the size of the queue. So that is the size method. Okay, so we say return this dot items dot length. So you're basically just returning the length of the queue. All right, so let's move on to the last method, which is printing the element in the queue, and we can say print queue. Let me say print queue and say, okay, we want to return this dot items dot join. So we want to take the queue and then join the items inside with an empty space to print it. So this is going to print all the elements in the queue with a space between each element. All right, so we have the various methods implemented. Let me save that to format it. Let me take off this space. So the next thing to do is to test our queue to see if it works correctly. Okay, so I have some examples over here which I'm going to copy and then paste, and let's check if it works. But before I do that, let me explain to you what I'm doing over here. So this first thing is basically creating an instance of the queue. So we have an instance of the queue over here, and the first thing we are going to do is to check if the queue is empty, and we are expecting it to be true because we have initialized a new queue and we want to check if it's empty, which is obviously going to be. Okay, so we use the enqueue method to add in some elements 10, 20, 30, and then we print to see the elements in the queue, right? So we are expecting this. The next thing we do is to check the peak element, which is the first element in the queue, and we expect 10. And then we remove the first element by using the dequeue method, right? So if we remove it, we expect it to be returned to us. So we expect 10. Now that we have removed 10, we want to print the rest of the queue to check the elements remaining, and we expect 20 and 30, right? And then we check the size of the queue, and then we expect 2. So I'm going to open up my console and I'm going to do that. Okay, right. So let me say node queue.js and run that, and we have an error. So it's going to tell us that it's pointing to the push, cannot read properties of undefined push. Okay, so let me quickly check what the error is and let me get back to you guys. So this is the items. This is supposed to be items, right? Dot push element. All right, so let me run that again, and then we have our result over here. So we check if the queue is empty, returns true, we put in 10, 20, and 30, and we print that out, and it prints that out for us. We check the first element in the queue, which is 10, and then we dequeue the first element and we get 10. If we print out the rest of the queue, we are left with 20 and 30, and then if we check the size of the queue, we are left with 2. So guys, that is the implementation of a queue. It's very straightforward and easy. I would like you to subscribe and like the video if you found this helpful. Alright, so we have come to the end of this video. I'm going to leave this code in my GitHub repo. I'm going to leave the link of that in the description. Kindly subscribe, like, and comment on some of the things that you like me to talk about, and I'll see you in the next one.